Welcome back to the Occult Rejects. Today we are joined once again by David Rankine, author, researcher, magician, and one of the most important modern voices working with the Grimoire tradition. Today, we're not treating grimoires as curiosities, props, or spooky antiques. We are treating them as what they actually are: ritual systems preserved in book form. They are texts built out of prayers, conjurations, seals, names, circles, tools, planetary timing, purification rites, spirit hierarchies, and very specific instructions for approaching the invisible. A grimoire is not only something you read, in many cases, it is something you enter. These books sit in the strange territory between religion and magic, between devotion and command, between manuscript culture and lived ritual. They draw from Christian prayer, Jewish angelology, Solomonic legend, classical astrology, Arabic occult philosophy, folk magic, Neoplatonism, and the older magical currents of the Mediterranean world. They are not clean texts, they are layered texts. They carry copying errors, adaptations, theological tensions, regional practices, scribal fingerprints, and the accumulated pressure of centuries of practitioners trying to speak with angels, demons, planetary intelligences, and spirits of every kind. That is what makes them so powerful and so difficult. Modern occultism often strips these books down to their most dramatic images: the demon, the seal, the circle, the triangle, the command. But the older material is much more demanding than that. It asks the practitioner to prepare the body, purify the mind, consecrate the tools, observe the timing, invoke divine authority, construct sacred space, and stand inside a cosmology where every word, name, gesture, and material has weight and meaning. This is why David Rankine is such an important guest for this conversation. His work does not reduce grimoires to fantasy, superstition, or aesthetics. He spent decades studying the manuscripts, tracing the spirit catalogs, comparing the rituals, restoring neglected material, and approaching these texts as both a scholar and a practitioner. So today we are going into the old books. We are going to ask what a grimoire really is, what this tradition comes from, why Solomon became the great mythic authority of magical literature, how angels and demons are organized, why circles and seals matter, what divine names are doing inside these rites, and whether the grimoire tradition can still be approached seriously today without turning it into cosplay, empty religion, or watered down occult theater. Because maybe the real question is not whether these books still have power. Maybe the deeper question is this: what does a book become when it is written as a doorway? That's enough out of me, and I'm going to introduce the rest of the guests and finally get to the rest of the co-hosts and finally get to the guest himself. And let me start off with Kaiva. What is going on, Kaiva? How are you? Thank you so much for making this episode.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me on. It's nice to meet you, David. Everybody can find me at 11kaivarose33.com. I offer traditional astrology readings and tarot readings, and I also post daily and weekly astrology videos on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. Thank you.
Thank you very much for making it. And Jin, my man, what is going on, Jin? Thank you so much.
What is up, Mr. 3393, Cardinal Electric Head? Thanks, boss, for having me on, and thank you, David, and of course, Eros, my co-host at the Grey Lodge, which we are doing a speculative anthropology of magic series on Southeast Asia. So last night we did our first Indonesian episode, which is kind of my specialty in a way. But yeah, and the last episode of Threshold Saints was actually with Kaiva Rose. Not the last episode, but the last episode that I released was with Kaiva Rose. So xenographic cartographies, so people can check that out on either YouTube or Substack. So it's youtube.com/Threshold Saints. You can find all the Grey Lodge and all of Threshold Saints, speculative Kala Chakra, speculative Gnosticism, and speculative K-Ball. So thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, sir. And, but not many people may know this, but what were you saying? The Indonesian stuff, right? That you covered?
Yeah. So I started this. Oh, sorry.
Very well educated in that. And I don't think too many people know that. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Oh, yeah. No, I really appreciate that. Thank you. It was my specialty in university, and it's also my ethnic background. So it makes sense.
Yeah. Like even some of the other voodoo stuff that you got into on the show, I was very surprised. Like Jin knows a lot of stuff besides what he normally talks about. So just saying, throwing it out there.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It's awesome to be flex in front of David. So
no, not even that. It's just, for other topics besides the usual shit we get asked for. You know what I'm saying? Just keeping it real. Thank you. I appreciate it, Jim. And Brandon, my man, what is going on, sir? How are you?
What is up, everybody? It's so wonderful to be here. So wonderful to meet you, David. This is going to be spectacular. Everyone knows where they can find me, Magus in the Media, where we break down myth, magic, and meaning, philosophy, and the strange and chaotic science fiction dystopic world we live in, and just realize that we all are awakening sovereign magicians in this world. And so just go over to all the things. Me and Kaiva, the lovely Rose up there, do an every Monday evening show. And we're just trying to make sense of this fantastic world. I know I've been talking about a lot coming out with Lon Milo's interview. Monday morning, it will finally drop. I talked to the fantastic Mark Booth, and I'm so excited for that episode to drop as well. Tons of episodes, tons of stuff to come out, because as we swirl down this ocean of chaos, we can rise to the heavens. So thank you, Nick, as always. Everyone on here, I love you all. Let's get to it.
No, thank you very much. And for my listeners that may not know, I definitely suggest to go check out the show that they've been doing. I was on it 1 week and I had a blast, and it's really good stuff, really good stuff. So I highly suggest checking out that new stuff they've been doing together.
Thank you, Nick.
Of course. Jules, my man, what is going on, Jules? How are you?
I'm going to sound pretty dull coming out after Brandon. Guys, what's going on? I'm Jules, host of Grey Pilled. Nick, thanks for having me back on. It's been a minute. Kaiva, Jen, Brandon, Eros, it's good to see you guys. David, it's nice to meet you as well. Can't wait to hear what you have to talk about, what you got to say. Very interested in this topic today. You can find me over on Twitter now at greypilled with 3 Ds, because my old account got hacked. Go over to the Patreon. We got Gods of the Morning Wood, Occult Cinema, and I got some deep dives coming up, some stuff on augury, some stuff on blots and the bogs, and lots of cool things going on over on our channel, where we like to fear nothing and question everything, quite literally, to our detriment sometimes. So again, Nick, thanks for having me on, and it's good to see everybody today.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you. And finally, Eros, last but not least, what's going on?
Hello. Thanks, David, for coming on again. It's really nice to see you again. I think we were all very excited. So the last one was really good. Really excited for this one. So thanks for having me on, Nick. I have a YouTube channel, Arrows Up, where I post a lot of meta discussions around like the Western tradition, Neoplatonism, Jung, astrology, stuff like that. And then I also have a Substack now. So it's just like Substack / Arrows Up. And yeah, that's all I have to plug.
Well, very nice. Nice. Congrats on the Substack. I just started one myself too. I'll have to go find you. Very good. Finally, David, please let everybody know where they can find any of your work. Please promote any book that you would like to promote, anything that you're working on you want to mention. Let everybody know what's up with you.
Okay, well, I mean, I suppose my website, dranking.com, is an easy place to find material, although I'm not that great at keeping it updated. At the moment, I've just finished a book which is going to be going through the publishers in the next few weeks. Recently, my focus was on practical work. So the last 2 books, Claves Intelligentiarum and Clavis Spiritum, were my sort of templates of grimoire conjuration and everything you need to know and to practice, so that you could go from never having worked with the grimoires to doing complete conjuration. Prior to that, it was the 2 volumes of the Grimoire Encyclopedia, which was 3 years of intense research and crazy. I seem to be alternating. I did like the research with Grimoire Encyclopedia, then there's 2 practical books for the Claves. Now I've got another research book coming out, and I'm back writing another practical grimoire book, which I'd started writing but put on hold to write the research one because I got prodded to put the material out. So yeah, I'm sort of alternating between books of research and books of practice and actually doing the conjurations and stuff at the moment. That's a balance I'm quite happy with. I mean, I've got the next couple that I want to get after the next practical one. I want to return to Grimoire Encyclopedia volumes 3 and 4 that I've also started putting stuff together for. And then after that, it will be the 3rd Claves book in the trilogy, which will be another practical one. So I seem to have gone into this phase of alternating between my two main hats of research and practice, and that's kind of where I'm at the moment.
Well, that helps. I mean, I get that. You kind of want to get the practice in there besides just the theory. You know, my opinion. Something I want to ask just for the listeners, and then kind of just a question, just interested, you know, why you got into this. What is a grimoire to you? And then I guess what was it that in the magical community you thought you needed to start bringing more knowledge about these grimoires to it?
To me, the grimoires, there's three main threads that run through the grimoires generally, which is conjuration of spiritual creatures, divination. You know, there's, when I put all the material together for the Grimoire Encyclopedia, there was like 36 different types of divination recorded through the grimoires, and simple charms. This is the stuff that you don't need to do lots of big work for easing the frictions of daily life, let's say. And those, you find different amounts of those three threads in different grimoires. Some might be focused almost entirely on one, like conjuration. Others have a bit more the divination or more of the simple charms and stuff. But they're generally typified by the things you were saying in the introduction. You know, they usually have the magic circles that are associated with it, the consecrations, the conjurations, the prayers, the purification and preparation. I mean, I think one thing that really needs to be stressed is that most of the grimoires are not complete manuals. They were like people's personal working books. They weren't being produced to be published at a later date, particularly not through until you get to, you know, after the printing press, and then stuff, certainly like we get, for example, the French black magic books. They were sort of, you know, hashed together to be put out there to be sold. So you get the Grimoire of Pope Honorius in 1670. Then later things like the Black Dragon and stuff, they're largely just rehashing chunks out of it and being put together to be sold, because they were sold dirt cheap. You know, the Bibliothèque Bleue, the blue library, because they were wrapped in this blue rice paper, and because of printing them being more commonly available, they were being sold at fairs and all over the place, so they were available very cheaply, and they became much more accessible to the masses. But that's much later in the grimoire tradition, where it's sort of like the more what's known as like the black magic, you know, the French black magic stuff, where it's very much demonic, whereas the earlier stuff a lot more angel focused. But really, I suppose what makes a grimoire is that it was being used for conjuration, I would say, at the end of the day. That is the strongest key element. There's something that Gal Sofa brought up recently in an essay he wrote, which I talked about sort of 20 years ago, which I think is also important to look at with the grimoire tradition, which is the importance of the Key of Solomon. He calls it an auxiliary manual, which I think is a great term. I wish I'd thought of that 20 years ago. I just said it was like the one that people had, and it was assumed that a grimoire magician would have had or seen the Key of Solomon and had access to it. So a lot of the grimoires, they're very piecemeal. They were writing down the things they needed, you know, the spirit registry, the circles, the conjurations. The reason why a lot of the grimoires don't have, for example, some of the tools and stuff in, it's not because you didn't use the tools, it's because it was assumed you would know about them from having a copy of the Key of Solomon. That's why there's over 200 manuscripts of the Key of Solomon that have survived, whereas all the other grimoires, they're usually between 1 to 6 copies, you know, that have survived, just to show the difference in scale. And I think that's because the Key of Solomon was the one it was assumed you had or had access to, that gave you a lot of the purifications, the consecrations and stuff. That's why they're not recorded in a lot of them. And there are actually a couple of grimoires where it says such and such as per the key. It's actually saying, you know, exactly that. So the Key of Solomon is kind of like the backbone in some senses of a lot of the grimoire tradition. And I'll pause at that point, because otherwise I'll just rant on.
Oh, that was good. One thing I did want to mention, there's a couple of things that you said that I wanted to say something on. I'm trying to remember all of them. I think manuscripts, you know, for people listening, people may not realize or know that like those were like, in my opinion, why I think grimoires might have been more mass produced. His manuscripts were handwritten, so there was only so many of those being made. You know what I'm saying? Once they started the printing, like you said, then they could start being mass produced. So that is like the difference between a grimoire and a manuscript. I don't know if some people know that or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, some of the early ones that were only available in grimoire form then do get printed and made more widely available. I mean, that Heptameron is an example, you know, that's one of the most influential ones as well. And initially that's knocking around as in its earlier form as the elucidation of necromancy. And then it becomes evolves into the Heptameron, and then it gets printed, and then you see its influence in so many later books because people were just nicking bits wholesale from it. Oh, yeah, that consecration, that bit, those circles, and so you see its influence hugely through the later sort of printed texts as well.
Did anybody have any questions before I keep going?
I have a quick, it's sort of a riff on what you were saying, Nick, and it's a repeat for David from the first time that he came, but I think it's worth explicating on or listening to him explicate on it. The relationship between Christian monasticism and the early and also middle chronology of the production of grimoires. David, can you speak on this? Because it seems to be a very contentious issue in the broader occult community, this, Christian legacy of magic.
Yeah. If we go to Spain and the court of Alfonso the Wise, Alfonso X in the, I would say 12th century, he decided that he wanted Catalonian to become the language of academia. And so he collected together scholars, translators. So he had Jewish, and Arabic, and Christian scholars translating texts and making them available in Catalan and then into Latin. That's, for example, how the Picatrix gets translated from Arabic into Catalan and Latin. The first alchemy texts that come into medieval Europe are through his court, translated from Arabic. Texts like Liber Ratio. So he was really influential. He was very interested in the subject, as royalty and aristocracy are seen to be throughout, the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. But aside from him bringing the stuff in, it is largely through the literate monastic community that we see the reproduction of things like the Ars Notoria and various other texts. It's quite amusing that there is this Inquisition record from Venice from I think it's the 17th century, and it's something like 660 odd pages, and it's all records of the inquisitions of monks caught using the Key of Solomon. So they were literate. They preserved it, so it's very much a Christian aspect of magic, and then it sort of spreads it very much into the aristocracy and nobility, to the royal families. But it's not the Christianity of the church, and that's, I think, where it starts to end up going underground with the monks and other people. So, Tryphemus is a great example. He collects this amazing library and he writes these books, all the while being an abbot, and he's like, of course, this is deceptions of the devil and this is evil stuff, but we have to have it to know what we're fighting, kind of thing. So, and then he teaches Agrippa, and he also Paracelsus, so he's incredibly influential. And Agrippa teaches Weyer, who then produces Pseudo-Monarcha Devodum, and so you get these whole threads of development. But yeah, it's not the Christianity of the church and the priest, and it's a much more, in a sense, heretical Christianity. It's where the focus is on the cosmology of the Trinity and of spirits, of working with them, that the belief was that man had the authority from God to command spirits, and therefore it was something that was fine for them to do. But that did not necessarily agree with what the church, the main church line was. But there was arguments. Some of the grimoires have like the rationales for why it's fine because the Bible says it's fine, and this is where, because Jesus points it out here, or stuff like this. And it's interesting that it is the cosmology, but it's not church cosmology. It's cosmology of a Christian worldview of spirits, which is very different to what you would get worshipping in a church. And I think that is an important distinction to make. But yeah, certainly it's through the monastic copying of manuscripts and things that a lot of the material was preserved. And then obviously as literacy starts to increase further down the line and the power of the church starts to be eroded a bit, it's interesting that sort of coincides with how the grimoires tend to get simplified and made easier to use.
Okay, I have a quick follow-up to that one. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so this will sound like a newbie question for you, David, but I want to hear your answer, and I think everyone will be interested in what you have to say about it. How important do you think both Christian and Hebrew Kabbalah is to the grimoire tradition as it arose in Europe? And I know there are different entry points for that in the church, something Nick and I have often discussed. Like there are different sort of where they're obviously playing with Sephardic ideas, including the luminous mysteries. That's kind of something I've been thinking about a lot lately. But anyways, I want to hear what you have to say just broadly on the nature of Kabbalah, and even in regards to the Picatrix and like how the Sefer Yetzirah proposes a kind of Kabbalistic astrology and how that relates to ceremonial magic as sort of a foundational idea.
Well, Kabbalah is kind of one of my big threads alongside, grimoires. I've been sort of studying, practicing Kabbalah ever since I was 14, so it's always been there. I've written quite a few books on the subject. So there is Kabbalah in the grimoires. I mean, some people say there's no Kabbalistic stuff. There are some which are very heavily influenced by Kabbalah. The most of them are not. But there is a commonality in terminology of, you will find Kabbalistic divine names, for example, spread throughout the grimoires. So there is definitely an influence, and because of that Neoplatonic influence that went into the grimoires and the Neoplatonic influence that's also in Kabbalah, there's already kind of like a shared root there, which made it easier, I think, for a lot of a transposition of ideas between the two. I mean, Sefer Yetzirah, I think, is wonderful. It's an amazing text. That's why I wrote my book, Sefer Yetzirah Magic, because there's so much implicit in so few words in that book. It's an incredible masterpiece, the Sefer Yetzirah. And as you say, I mean, it implies so much, which then people have built on. Plus, I've created techniques and practices just from like a line or two lines of it, because it's so much is implied in what is there in Sefer Yetzirah. So has that answered enough, or do I need to...
I just want to say that I did ask the question specifically, or I mentioned Sefer Yetzirah because I knew you had written a book on it, but it's also one of my favorites. And I find, I may not play as K-Ball as professionally as you, David, but I consider myself pretty good as well. So I really appreciate that answer. Thank you so much.
One thing I did want to ask, because you mentioned it before, you mentioned Trithemius, if I'm saying his name correctly. If I remember correctly, he was like really huge into ciphers, I think, correct?
Yeah, we did Steganographia.
Yeah.
Stephen Skinner and Daniel Clark recently did a really nice edition of like the complete text of that together for the first time in English in Golden Horde. But he was very much, he did another text called Polygraphia, and that's where I think we first see Theban script, for example, which then becomes really popular in Wicca and paganism. And that turns up, I think, first in Polygraphia, if I remember correctly. So yeah, that was a big thing. The idea that you could, it's kind of like a spirit's phone or internet for the time, that the idea that you would be able to do this thing and then the person on the other end would be able to decipher it. the spirit would take the message to them and they would be able to decipher it. So you could have almost instantaneous communication over vast distances, which was, the underlying idea of steganographia.
Yeah, that's some wild stuff. Do you think that grimoires might be ciphered?
Generally, I would say they're not. There were people recording their own stuff. You do get the exception. There's this one that I put out with Stephen Skinner, Clavis Inferni, Keys of Hell, which I found the manuscript in the Wellcome Library in London back in the early noughties. That was when they had like the old card files, and I thought that looks interesting. And I pulled it up, got them to bring the manuscript up. It was like this little book, like this big. Nobody had looked at it for over 50 years, and I looked at it, and then it was beautiful. These incredible, beautiful images. That is cipher, because it's various different magical alphabets. It's mainly Latin, the text, but the Latin, a lot of the words are contracted and reversed, or contracted and reversed, and then with different things, magical alphabets thrown in the place of words. And yeah, that was originally we were going to make that the second book in the Sorceress of Ceremonial Magic series, but it took us about 3 years to fully decipher it. And we got a couple of other books out in the meantime, and even then, we had help from a couple of friends who were able to help with odd bits, like Joe Peterson helped with. There was one thing I couldn't find, and I sent it, and he was able to point me out. They said, "Oh, it was from this," which was a great help. And then a couple of other friends who were professors, who, like Peter Forshaw, who teaches the MA in Occult Studies at Amsterdam. That's one of the things I love about the Grimoire community, is there's a very great sense of support and communication amongst the sort of people who are doing the research. That one was entirely ciphered and was a pain in the arse. It took, like I say, it took us about 3 years to decipher the whole thing, and it's not a very long manuscript either. But it was worth it, 'cause the imagery and stuff, and it's beautiful, and it's got these lovely images of the 4 demon kings, of the directions of them, their animals, and their seals. And you don't see the seals like that anywhere else in the grimoires. There's some very sloppy ones in one of the 15th century Italian manuscripts, but they're not nearly as nice or clean, and they look different. So these ones have become quite popular. You'll see them all over now, all over the internet, and in grimoire groups. Anywhere you see people having the sigils of the 4 kings, it's the ones from Clavis Inferni.
Nice. Does anybody have any questions? And real quick, David, I hate to ask you this. I think if you can, maybe just like move the wire on your headset. I think we're getting feedback from it didn't seem to make a difference. It's all right. It's not too bad. It's all right.
I can. Does it make a difference if I take them off?
Yeah, actually, that sounds better. Yeah, there's less. Yeah, there's not that buzzing anymore. Awesome.
Okay.
Did anybody have any questions for him before I keep going? I'm sure somebody has something they want to ask.
Yeah, I guess I just have a question. When you work with the grimoires, do you work with them after you've kind of already initiated your own connection to the spirits or the stars or whatever it is, and then find the symbols connecting to the ones that you've already kind of like intuitively interpreted? Just kind of curious.
These days, I only tend to work with, I mainly work with the spirits that I've pacted with. So I don't need to go off and do the others, which is also great because it means I don't need to do like a week's preparation and purification and everything, because I've already got the relationship in place. So I will just do it on the day. And with some of them, I don't even need to do conjuration. If you get what I would call like, there's like a sort of spectrum that, when you have a pact with a spirit on, like at the top end of the spectrum, it's literally you can just say out loud the question you want to ask and the spirit will tell you. So if you've got one of those, that's brilliant. And I have that with a couple of mine. But in the past, it's been ones who I've felt had qualities that were what I was looking for, that would be able to help assist me with, the situation. I've worked a lot with the planetary intelligences, for example, because apart from their reputation for being like friendly and easy to access, I found them to be very effective, very good at actually getting results. And so I have worked with spirits when I've had them turn up in my dreams and tell me they want to work with me. When we're in our dream state, that's a really easy time for spirits to communicate with us. And I quite often get woken up by them, particularly if I'm working on a book. I get woken up in the middle of the night by a spirit going, you need to do this, or you need to add this in, or you need to change this. And so, yeah, from the dreaming point of view, definitely that's a time where I've had them contact me. It's like us humans don't keep planetary hours. They'll just turn up whenever they want spirits to tell us stuff. So usually it's either me thinking that's one that I want to work with because there's qualities or things I'm looking for, or them turning up and saying, do this with us because it will be beneficial all round.
Yeah, thank you. I was mainly asking because like the fixed stars, like oftentimes like I work with the stars and they like grab your attention. And then when you really start to like connect with that star, you see the sigils and the symbols. And then I find that with a couple of the stars I've worked with, like it's very similar to the ones I find in books, the symbols and the sigils, but they're different ever so slightly. But like the essence of the thing is similar. So I was just wondering if that's something that you have found working with the stars or anything like that.
One thing I have found, which kind of ties in with what you're saying about the similarity, similar but not quite the same, is that spirits often give you then a private name or a slightly different version of their seal, which is say, use this to contact me. And it's kind of like having someone's private phone number, that you get quicker access to them. So what you're saying there with like this seals that you're getting me slightly different, to me, that sounds like that thing where they've gone, yeah, that works, but if you just refine it like this, it'll work even better for you. And that's, a point I like to make when I can, because, what is there in the grimoire is with any other magic, the stuff in the grimoires, it's usually one person's experience. So there can be mistakes in it. And particularly with all the copying errors and other things that creep in. I mean, I've looked at a couple of grimoires and it's really obvious the person did not know Hebrew at all and transliterated stuff really badly, and you're like, oh no, that shouldn't be a shin, that should be a samek. And they thought that was or the other way around from Hebrew to English, and what should have been a resh they've translated as a Dalek because they look quite similar in shape and things like this. And it is definitely a thing to remember, that spirits, when you have engaged with them, and it's one of the questions I always tell people, first time you do a conjuration of a spirit, one of the questions you should always ask before you give the license to depart is, are there ways I can make future communication with you easier? Is there a specific time you like? Is there a different resin or oil to burn that you would prefer? Just things that will make the process go easier for next time and make the whole process flow more smoothly. Because once you've had that initial engagement with them, it's generally much easier, for repeat conjurations in the future with that spirit, whether you pact or not. I mean, and there are benefits to pacting, but I don't recommend people go around pacting with spirits all the time or having lots of pacts, because any pact requires effort from both sides, and so I don't think it's a good idea to have lots of pacts. But yeah, an awful lot of what you will get from them is not in the books as well. That's really important to stress. It's information that they give directly to you that isn't recorded in those grimoires, and that doesn't mean that it's not right. Because, like I say, it's like the forms. Take for example the Ars Goetia. You have all these images of the different spirits. It appears as an old man on a horse bearing a sword with a crown. That's how the person who did the first conjuration saw it. So that was like his gateway image for that spirit. But it doesn't mean it will turn up in that form. It's a spirit. It can assume different forms. It might turn up in a different form when you conjure it. The key thing is that when you do a conjuration and the spirit turns up, that you test it to make sure it is the spirit that you called.
That was a great question, Kaiva, because obviously in Buddhism, we would say that's existence appearance, the spirit arising in different forms, like a dakini dancing. You could also describe it as, they can ride a vahana, ride a mount, or ride, as David was saying, ride like king riding the horse. I always think of the Queen of Winter because there is a Tibetan and Mongolian goddess who also is called the Queen of Winter and also rides a camel. So I think that, yeah, it's really interesting to see and how they codify all of the different sort of iconographic symbols and semiotics within images. As David, I think that's a great word, David, like the gateway image, like a threshold image that you can then use to access the outer gate. And then once you sort of reach that place of non-dual gnosis, Dalet, if you will, you maybe get a higher knowledge for sure. That meeting between, as Kaiva was saying, like Bina textual sort of wisdom and then also the experiential wisdom, like bringing both of those things together. I think that's really interesting.
Another really important point there as well, which is when you do see the spirit in the crystal or the mirror, to pay attention to the environment it appears in as well, because there'll often be symbols and aspects of it coded into that. I had a friend who did a conjuration and was doing this conjuration for money, and the spirit appeared behind a desk with like gold coins on it, whereas a different spirit for something else might turn up and it's like in an orchard with apples. And so looking at the environment that the spirit is in, as well as what it's wearing, what it's carrying, etc., all those can be key points and should be recorded. It's like, I have my thing I always say to people, if you're working solo conjuring, which most people do, is learning to write on paper that you've got on your knee while still looking into the crystal and keeping the engagement going. You learn to write without looking at what you're writing. And but as soon as you see the spirit, write the description of the environment so you don't miss it for later or forget afterwards, and record everything. Have your questions pre-written, but have the answers that it gives you, write them down as you're going. Because it can be stuff that you pick up afterwards that tell you more about the spirit and about the engagement with it.
One thing I wanted to ask, if nobody has anything else, I did want to kind of get into a little bit for the listeners, a little bit of like what this is going to look like once you're all ready and set up and you have everything that you supposed to have to do these things. Can you kind of give people an idea of like what your working space and how the practitioner is going to look when they go to approach this?
Okay, so the first thing is going to be whether you're indoors or outdoors. I would say more people probably do it indoors than outdoors. So let's go with that because it's simpler, because we don't have to get into the whole. If you work outdoors, you need to find a suitable space where you're not going to be disturbed. You also need to then develop a relationship with the spirits of the place and make sure they're going to be happy with you doing conjuration in their space. So that's a whole other separate kettle of fish. So we'll just look at indoors. If you're working solo, it doesn't necessarily have to be a full 9-foot radius circle, diameter circle. But, originally the Key of Solomon says 9-foot radius, which then got, for example, taken by Gerald Gardner, is 9-foot diameter, and that's why the circle in Wicca is 9 foot. But a 9-foot diameter circle does not hold many people very comfortably. Obviously, a 9-foot radius would, but that's like an aside. So you get, it can be a 9, 11, it depends. These preferably, I'd say, at least 7-foot circle, because you're going to have the bars, the sort of bands which might have text and pentagrams and symbols and stuff in. So you need enough space for you to be sitting comfortably in the middle and to stand and to sort of slightly walk around. So you can have the magic circle on the floor. I personally am a great fan of making the magic circle on lino that can be rolled up or cut into 4 pieces, which you then tie together, because you can then transport that for outdoor work as well. You're going to have your either triangle or circle of manifestation that you would then, if it was me, there would be like there's a little stool on which rests the seal of the spirit that's being called, with the crystal ball on top of it. And then on the outside, of the triangle or circle, you will have 3 candles set so that one is behind the crystal or mirror and 2 at the sides, whether it's a circle or if it's a triangle there at the corners, if it's a circle there, still in that same triangle form. I say circle or triangle because you normally would use a triangle for the spirit locus. If it's infernals, if you're working with demons, you can also use it for intelligences, but for the other celestials, angels, archangels, Olympic spirits, they prefer use a circle to put your crystal in or your mirror. Having that little stool or stand for it means that the crystal is at an angle so that when you're sitting down on the floor, it's close to eye level, so it's easier to engage, to look into the crystal and how engage at eye level. I've found over the years it's much more comfortable than having it on the floor and having your neck bent looking down. So you will have that, you will have the circle. I mean, one thing with most grimoire stuff is you don't have an altar. That's a difference that a lot of people don't seem to realize. Some do have a table of practice, but the majority of them, there's no altar or table of practice. You know, the stuff that's there is either carried and then put down or kept around. Like for the sword, for example, will be in the scabbard at your side. Or I actually use a frog, you know, which is like this sort of clasp that you put on your belt that you can just put the sword through. So the circle itself, it's not going to have that much in it. It's going to have possibly 4 candlesticks at the 4 cardinal points. Again, high, because you want the candles to be quite far off the ground. They stand out, then they're less likely to be knocked over by you going round. You're going to have your book, your own personal grimoire, the conjurations and stuff in that you use, and a few other things like censer or oil burner. I personally use an oil burner and use oils with blessed water for the fragrance rather than incense or resin, because A, they don't make smoke, so you don't have to worry about smoke detectors. B, incenses, unless they're pure resin, always end up smelling like a bonfire after a while, and you want the nice fragrance because spirits like nice sweet fragrances. And a lot of the ones in the grimoires have like animal parts like blood and brains and bones and stuff, and bits of mineral and stuff, which not only smell foul but can be a bit toxic to the health, so not good in an enclosed space. Like I say, you can use pure resin, but even pure resins, when they get to the end of the burn, tend to be not so pleasant. Whereas if you use an oil burner, you will get an even release of fragrance over the whole period without needing to refill it. So from that perspective, much prefer it. And it's not the smoke that attracts the spirits, it's the fragrance. That's another misconception, this whole idea of like the smoke, what the spirits want. They don't give a damn about the smoke, it's the fragrance that attracts them. And we see that recorded all the way back in ancient Sumer. And so you've got the space, possibly a cushion to sit on, no reason why you shouldn't, or even a chair. You can have a little chair, depending if the space is big enough in the room. As long as it's consecrated, you know, everything that goes into that space is consecrated. There'll be you wearing a white linen robe. I'm not huge on jewelry. I mean, some rituals you might have a crown for and a belt, others not. It depends on which grimoire you're working. You, depending on whether it's night or day, you're going to have your curtains shut anyway, so you might have extra candles for light. Somebody came up with an idea recently, which I thought was genius for outdoor work, which is they mentioned to me, just to get one of those little headlights, you know, the bands that you put around your head with the light on, so that you can read in the dark if you're out in the middle of the woods somewhere on a dark night. And I thought, that's such a good idea. You can make one of those and like symbols on the band and stuff, and have it consecrated. So that's the main things you're going to have there. You'd also have, you know, holy oil, holy water for asperging the circle. and a couple of other bits and pieces, and that's how your space is going to look. It's not as much paraphernalia as people think. People think there's so much paraphernalia, but it's not actually that much paraphernalia. The main things really is having the sword, which if you don't have the space, you can generally substitute in a black-handled knife. You know, if you're in a place where waving a sword around is going to be difficult because it's a small room, you can get away with it using the black-handled knife. In some of the grimoires, the wand is used in its place as well. But so we'll say sword stroke knife, your robe, usually white linen, your grimoire, your crystal or mirror, your circle, and your circle or triangular manifestation already prepped, and those other little bits, like I say, like the oil burner and aspergillus, or it might be you're using just like a little herb thing with the sprinkling the water. And you know, I went for all this in the 2 Claves books, you know, which were designed for people from no knowledge of grimoires to go all the way through to everything you need to know for successful conjuration. So it's full of all the handy little things that you learn from experience that you might not think of when you haven't done it before. So just things like, you know, you don't light the candles till after you've sprinkled the water. Then there's no chance of putting a candle out by sprinkling it with water. Which might seem silly, but you know, at the end of the day, you want to be practical. Yeah, it's actually a lot less stuff. The main key thing is really the preparatory period, that week beforehand. Although I do argue that although they didn't do it back in the day, there's no reason why you can't start building up what I call the magical momentum and the energy towards conjuration succeeding from the time you decide you're going to do it, which might be months before the actual conjuration. There's still things you can do on a daily basis to build up the energy for it, so that by the time you get there, instead of, you know, imagine starting the car a week beforehand with your preparation, you've already got the car rolling at a nice speed, and then that last week of preparation just gets the accelerator up further, so you get even greater speed, so you have far more chance of success with the conjuration.
That was amazing. Thank you very much for that whole description and scenario and everything that you did. Is there anything anybody wanted to ask?
Yeah, actually, I have a question. And yeah, that was fantastic. And I think all those things are really important. I also want to know how you feel or what you think about the different levels of consciousness as you're going through these rituals, as in you're talking about the tools and the complete setup of these things. And then how does that integrate? Like, how do you feel about the mind, the mnemonic working of all the tools and how they interact with your consciousness? And then what you think about where these spirits are at, where are they actually coming from as these things are going about?
Okay, if I can do the second part first, because
please.
Where they're coming from, this is something that people isn't really addressed, obviously, in the grimoires, I think, generally very well themselves, because they weren't being written with that in mind. It was just get them to turn up to do your stuff.
Yeah.
But in the Claves books, I went into this a lot, which is that the spirits are coming to you on the lower astral. The lower astral has exactly the same form as the physical plane. It's superimposed on it. They're in the same, but one removed, i.e. they're on the lower astral, which is why they can, on occasion, create effects in the physical world around us when they've turned up. So, you know, you feel them come, things might get knocked over, stuff like that. The whole point of the triangular circle of manifestation, you know, where you put the seal underneath the crystal or the mirror, that equates to what is mentioned back in Sefer HaRazim, which is like a 5th century Jewish text, the Book of Mysteries, which is arguably the first proto-grimoire, I would say. Shamin, which means heaven, it's like the first one. So the seat of Shamaim is where you are inviting the spirit to be seated in the seat of Shamaim, which is in the crystal in that circle or triangle on the lower astral, right next to where you are. on the physical, because it's literally a few feet away from you. The magic circle, all the consecrated stuff, that all shows on the astral. One of the reasons for consecration is it does give it an astral presence. Likewise, as an aside, because it's a handy tip, when you consecrate, for example, the sword has an aura around it. So when you go around activating your magic circle and tracing the circles and the names, you don't actually need the blade to touch them. It can be just held, a little bit above it, and the aura of it does the job. You draw it over, not actually touching. So then you also don't risk damaging the lino or fabric if you've got a fabric circle, or ripping it with the sword. But that whole sort of collection of consecrated items of your circle, of your sword, of your grimoire, all of the things, the crystal, acts also like a sort of lighthouse, in a sense of, it draws the attention of the spirit. And if you then add in the aspect, which I kind of have restored, having been told to, of calling the wind before you call the spirit, for the wind to bring the spirit to the seat of Shamain, you can then get the spirit to turn up really fast without needing to do lots and lots of recitations of the conjuration, because you get the wind to actually go and physically, as it were, on the lower astral, bring the spirit. So it's the difference between the spirit kind of like making its own way and walking to your circle or triangle, or sending an Uber for it. It gets there much faster. And so, yeah, they're coming on the lower astral, and you are presenting them with like a sort of heavenly seat, as it were, to sit on, which corresponds to where your crystal is. And that then acts as the gateway between you for you to engage through, which also then means that you don't have time restrictions, because if a spirit comes into our realm physically, which doesn't happen very often, can happen, they usually can only hang around for an hour or so, because it's not their natural environment. It's like a fish out of water. After a while, it's going to be unpleasant for them. So with regard to the more mental aspect of it, this brings in a really important thing, which wasn't around with the Grimoire period, but I've been stressing in Clave's books again and in other interviews, which in the modern world, now more than ever, we need to concentrate our mind when we're doing magical work. And in that purificatory period of that week beforehand, including what I call the electronic fast, where no social media, no gaming, only minimal use of things, like if you need to, emails or stuff, because you're in work and stuff like that, you can't get away from it. But those things that distract your energy and take away the concentration should be cut out, in the same way that you moderate what you eat in the fasting period, like not having meat and fish, and not having alcohol, etc. Because that fasting period of purification, to again help purify the mind and body, is not just have water for a week. It's only the last day that you go to only having water, and even on the last day, I have modified that, and I always teach people as well, have something like apple juice as well, so your blood sugar doesn't drop too much. You want to be fully with it and functional when you do the conjuration. So on the last day, and also always consult with a medical professional if there's any health issues with regard to, if the fasting and cutting things out of your diet is going to be a problem. Because at the end of the day, it's a living tradition. You can adapt things. You don't have to be 100% rigid, particularly if it comes to your health. In the same way, you would, if you had prescribed medication, you wouldn't stop taking that during your preparatory period, because you don't want to have a negative impact on your health. And if you're working with the spirits, they're going to want to engage with you at full capacity. So that's one thing. Another thing with the mental aspect of it and the states of consciousness, my own experience and what other people say to me as well, is as you start to build through when you do the prayers first before the conjuration, it starts to sort of get you into a bit more of an ecstatic state. Certainly the wind conjuration now that you use, there's this string of 95 sort of divine barbarous names at the end of it, and they have this incredible power in them that's unlike anything I've seen, that by the time you do the end of that, it's like it's completely blows you away. You can see the power that is in them that enables those winds to bring the spirits to you. If you're working solo, one thing I do suggest to people is there's a simple practice of visualization that I encourage people to do for helping to develop psychism, because a lot of people go, oh, I never see spirits. I'm not at all psychic. Everyone can, has some level of psychic ability, and practicing meditation and visualization on a daily basis helps improve your psychism. And so from that perspective, just a simple daily thing of 10 to 15 minutes a day of seeing a white circle on a black background, just doing that every day until you can keep that white circle the same size, not breaking, not changing at all. Because when you can do that, you will realize that you have shut off your internal dialogue. But you wouldn't, after 15 minutes, if you set an alarm or something. I used to do it when I started, it was for an hour. But in this day and age, telling people to do something like that every day for an hour, very few people are going to do it. But it really helps the mental muscles, and it also does start subtly developing the psychism. It's like a subtle change. You don't notice at first, but over time you realize that there is a much greater psychic sensory awareness as a result of doing these sort of practices. But that simple white circle, and if you've been doing that as a practice, it's like a really good little trigger thing that when you do the conjuration and you sit down, before you engage with the spirit, that you just do that again, just to bring that moment of calm to yourself. And say, as if it's become like a thing where you shut off the internal dialogue, you will also then be able to clearly hear the difference between the spirit's voice when it talks to you in your head and your own voice when you talk out loud. So your questions kind of put me on a tangent of various other key things that need to be sort of said about the tradition, but I hope that sort of satisfies. Or unless you want to.
I like that. That's great. And I think that's really important, because what it kind of leads me into this idea about doing magic versus being magic. And sometimes I wonder if all of the grimoire traditions are trying to actually train you into just being the magic in the world, instead of worrying about all the rituals, which maybe through time become a little silly. Not that it's silly, because I think they're really important. And I know how important ritual is, and especially in a postmodern era where people have no willpower, discipline, or the ability to shut off the mind. But there's something there, it feels like, the more you do all that stuff, where you kind of want to put it aside and just kind of let the great work open itself up to you, kind of like that embodied experience within the world. But I could be talking nonsense. So I just wonder what you think about that.
Absolutely. Magic. Ritual is a part of magic. Ritual is not magic. It's not the totality of magic. Yeah. Magic, for me, is all about how you engage with everything around you, all of life and the dead and everything. And what you give to the world, I suppose, from your actions. So ritual is important, but it's like this thing. My sort of first influence, I suppose, before magic was the Tao Te Ching. It's still my all-time favorite book. And from that, one of the things I got was, if you are doing what's right for you, rituals a lot of the time are actually like course correction. If you're actually going in the flow, you don't need to be doing them. I don't do lots of conjurations. I maybe do one a year now. And that's, will be for a specific thing, or because usually now I have one main interest with my conjurations, which is to get the spirits to tell me more about them. I want to hear about like the spirit side of it. And because we know so little about them and their natures. So if I do conjuration now, the purpose of my conjurations is for that. It's not for stuff for me. I want to know more about their side of things. But also, if you do have spirits that you have like a pact with, for example, you don't need to do the conjurations and stuff. You can just say, can you go and do this and this? And they go and do it. So it's, people do get hung up in it. I mean, when I started doing magic like 44 years ago, 46 years ago now, I was like 2 hours every day, meditation, visualization, doing rituals, first 7 years every day. And then it stopped being quite that much because, jobs and life, but still every day practice. And even now I still will do a little bit of meditational stuff every day. So I think it's good to have something, even if it's just simple meditation every day as part of my daily routine. But it's, like I say, most people are not willing to put in that initial work of building the foundations. And it's like when you've got the strong foundations, then I think it's the magic, because of the way you live your life, the magic tends to happen around you and because of you. And it doesn't need to be lots of ritual and stuff all the time. So you become more sensitive to what's going on, and so the course corrections, even the course correction side of it, becomes an automatic thing. But yeah, there's a great description of magic from ancient Egypt, when they called magic Heka. There was like the different names. There's Heka was magic. You had Sao, which was amuletic magic, and Aku, which was the magic of the dead. There was 3 different types of magic, but Heka is the main one. It's also the name of the god of magic. And it says, Ra gave Heka, i.e. magic, to man to ward off the arrows of misfortune. And practical magic generally is about removing friction from your life so that things go smoothly. At the end of the day, most simple magical charms and practices and spells are to remove friction. They're to ensure that things are going the way you want, that life is going the way you want. And so even back then, like 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, there was that view of magic, that it was there as part of life and how life was lived, but it wasn't this thing that we've got to do rituals all the time. So yeah, I think absolutely with what you're saying, I'm totally on board with that.
Yeah, nice. Thank you, David. That was a perfect, so I appreciate that.
Thanks.
I have a quick follow-up. That was really a great entry point, Brandon. But it's obviously my comment question is for David. You mentioned the number 46 as the length of time you've been practicing magic, and also the Tao Te Ching. So I want to know, David, how do you resolve the paradox of numbers? This is a frequent discussion. Obviously, I'm a Vajrayanist, so for me, we always resolve paradox of numbers in the 1 and the 0, the 10. But I want to hear what you have to say about that.
In my early Kabbalah days, I was a bit number obsessed. I think most ritual magicians go through a phase where they get a bit obsessed with numbers, or they used to. Maybe they don't anymore. I don't know. Also, because my first degree was in maths and computing, so I always was kind of a bit of a number head. I guess for me, that whole thing that anything divided by 0 is infinite just removes the paradox of numbers. Everything can be equated and seen as part of the same, even with the different numbers.
Yeah, I agree. Be flexible, be fluid. Don't be fixed on the numbers. Although it is very tempting at times, especially when people, so there's so many people that love the number 9 and all of that. Like the Platonists come for me, David. So thank you so much for saying that. I appreciate that. Like a 0, be flexible.
Yeah, it's crazy how easy it is to get obsessed. I knew a guy back in the 1980s who lived in Leeds, and he got so obsessed by gematria and numbers that he wouldn't get on a certain bus because of its number. And that was the main bus route for the city. So he often had to take 2 or 3 buses and
I've been
take
there
several times as long to get somewhere because he was not willing to go on it. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, and they don't have their value with the numbers. I mean, like with gematria and stuff, if you get those flashes of inspiration and stuff, and suddenly, oh wow, that gives that, and that, great. They do have a value, but I just don't, I suppose, get wrapped up in them and obsessed with them and go down rabbit holes with them in the same way that I used to like 40 years ago. I prefer to be much more flexible, and I suppose my world has become much more spirit-based over the decades. So spirits don't really tend to, like, the other ones I've encountered don't really give a damn about numbers.
I was
numbers
wondering,
Go ahead, Eros. Go ahead.
are there any grimoires that really stand out to you? And why? Because I feel like obviously most people know about Solomon's grimoires, but maybe not about any others that would be really good to know about.
There's a few. Okay, one that I really like is the Hygromantia, which is kind of like one of the ones that may have influenced the Key of Solomon. The earliest known one is from 1440 from Greece. It's in Greek. There's a number of different manuscripts. It probably goes back a bit earlier, and some of the material looks like it goes back to the time of the Greek magical papyri. So it's definitely a carrying on of stuff from antiquity there. The thing that is unique about the Hygromantia out of all of the grimoires, and why I bring it up, is that in there you call on the demon of the hour. So there are 168 hours in the week. There's 168 demons, one for every hour of every day of the week. But before you do that, you call on the angel of the hour to constrain the demon. And before you do that, you call on the classical god or goddess of the day, and then the angel, and then the demon. So, for example, you might call on Venus on Friday or Luna on Monday. And it's the only grimoire that has like the classical gods in it. So from that point of view, for people who struggle with the Christian cosmology of the grimoires, Hygromantia is a really good entry point. I would also say with the Hygromantia, one of the reasons I'm so into it is because many years ago, back in about 2011, I think it was, I was at a big Hecate gathering. It was when I was living on the Welsh borders. We had a huge garden. We were doing a thing on the Monday night. We've been doing stuff all weekend. And I said I'd do conjuration and Hygromantia. And because it was sort of Luna Selene for Monday, and I've been working with Hecate since the 80s, I thought there's enough syncretism that I could call on Hecate, and then the Angel of the Hour and the Demon of the Hour. And we also had a fire there outside the circle, and did the prayer to Hecate, did the angel and then the demon, and then the demon actually manifested in the fire, and everyone there, and there was over like a dozen or so people, all saw like this, the flames forming a humanoid shape in the fire, which remained there while it engaged with me. And so it's one of the very few instances where I've actually had a physical manifestation in that fire outside the circle from doing the Hygromantia conjuration. So that's another reason why I mentioned Hygromantia, because I'm not saying, hey, work the Hygromantia, you'll get something that cool, but it was like a Hollywood special effect. It was fantastic. It's those sort of moments in magic where everyone there, most of the people had never seen a conjuration, and they were all completely like, oh my God, what the hell's going on? There was a couple of experienced ritual magicians who were just sort of sitting there absolutely loving it. But there was a few people who were quite new to things who got a bit freaked out by this demon figure in the flames. So the Hygromantia is one that I would say is definitely worth looking at. For me personally, I think the Arbitel is really important to look at, because it's where the Olympic spirits turn up. And the Olympic spirits are quite unique amongst all of the spirits. Most spirits are described as being formed of like a higher form of air or occasionally fire. But the Olympics, of all the spirits, are the ones they're made of equal amounts of earth, air, fire, and water. So they have a balance of the 4 elements in them. And there are 7 planetary spirits, 1 for each, the Olympics. So that makes them unique. They're very friendly. They're very courteous. And I've worked with the Olympics. I've done more work with the Olympics than the intelligences overall, probably than most other types of spirits from other grimoires. And the Arbitel also is basically a grimoire. Apart from that bit, the focus is on the ethics and philosophy of what's expected of you as a magician and how you should live a good life. And so that, I think, is a really important one to read. I've seen people online talk about the Arbitel and say, Arbitel is great because it's so simple, because you don't need a sword and you don't need this because it doesn't mention them. That goes back to my earlier point. Just because it doesn't mention them, it doesn't mean you don't need them. It assumes you knew you needed them and you would use them as per Key of Solomon, per your auxiliary manual. So the Arbitel, I really strongly recommend to people, because one thing I've seen over the years is that the better life you live outside of the circle, the more respect you get from spirits when you're inside the circle. Particularly when you're working with the celestials, the angels, they respond. They're much more likely to turn up and be willing to do stuff for you if you are a good person. If you, for example, maybe you give to charity, or you give some of your time if you don't have the money, to helping with good causes. If you are doing things for other people, for family or friends, rather than for yourself, that is, selfless, that's another thing that with the celestials that scores you extra points. So the Arbitel is an important one, I think, to read from that perspective, because it really gives you the mindset that goes with what will make a good conjurer. So that I would definitely recommend. There's a lot. I really like the Keys to the Gateway of Magic, which has all sorts of interesting stuff in there and gives the best description I've seen of how to test a spirit, for example, and lots of other interesting things as well. Stephen Skinner and I did that as volume 2 of Sourceworks, which has the 9 keys, which is conjurations with the archangels. I don't recommend people conjure archangels, certainly not early in their career. Archangels, for start, always do the 9-day prep for an archangel. Do not cut it short. When I've been practicing for about 20 years, I thought, okay, I've done a conjuration of Mikhail before from the Heptameron. I can get away with 3 days prep. So I only did 3 days prep. He did not turn up. He sent an angel in his place who gave me a right bollocking about how egotistical and disrespectful I was, and don't ever do that again. So yeah, archangels are absolute sticklers for protocol and doing things right. So that was an important lesson. Reminder: never get too big for your boots. I've never made that mistake again. You can be sure. But you don't actually need the archangels generally. Like I say, the Olympics and the intelligences I found work brilliantly for most of the things that you might want. Other grimoires I think are particularly important. The Heptameron stroke elucidation of necromancy is an absolute key one. It's got a lot of the stuff that is the backbone of the tradition. It's not that big a text, but the consecrations and things like that are in there are invaluable. Any others I would say those are the ones really I'd start with. Would be the Heptameron stroke elucidation, the Arbitel, are the two I would, alongside the Key of Solomon, put as your sort of base, and then sort of go look beyond there. Because there's a lot. The Grimoire Encyclopedia had 100 different books in it, of which 90 were different grimoires. There's a lot in the tradition of grimoires. Some of them there's only one obscure copy somewhere. Some there's a number of different ones. What I would say is, don't jump into, if you've not done conjuration, don't jump into the demonic stuff straight away. Work with intelligences or Olympics for your first conjuration. The Grimoire Verum has got a lot more popular in recent times. I've never worked it. It just doesn't interest me or appeal to me. But Matt Hadfield has a group that's running that, and he does stuff on Substack with that. I'd strongly recommend. A lot of people, Ars Goetia has a huge rep, and people tend to jump in with the Ars Goetia as well. It's one I've actually worked with an awful lot. That's my first magical lodge. We worked a lot with the Ars Goretia, and I've worked it by myself and with other people over the decades. Ars Goretia tends, you can get good results with it, but it's quite flawed. So I'm currently producing a corrected one. That's what the book I'm working on now is how to work Ars Goretia more effectively. Basically, is it's the latest book. I'm about a third of the way through writing. So if people want to work on Ars Goretia, wait till next year, and then you can have with all the extra added bits that should ensure you have safe success.
Nice. That's interesting.
I have a question.
Go for it, please.
Sorry, guys, I haven't been able to speak up. I felt like I've been in a sauna for the last hour.
Yeah, I saw the
Very
chat.
hot. That Mississippi heat. So there's a lot of talk online of people like writing their own grimoires. Would you suggest that, or like taking an older kind of text and like making it nuanced, or maybe recording what you are experiencing with whatever deity you're connecting with, and writing your own kind of thing out of that? What would you say? No, or is that dangerous?
I would say, as with any sort of magical system, when you have a sort of competence and fluidity with the system, sure, then play around with it.
Right.
But don't just like jump in and start messing around with it. My
So
Claves books.
Study these older texts before you go into anything. Okay.
Yeah,
I
I mean, the Claves books are written based on, they are true. They have a fidelity to the tradition of the core elements, but they also have aspects I've added in to make it more effective for people, like Conjuration of the Winds, which is there in the very early ones, like Summa Sacra Magicae in 1346, but then it drops out of the tradition, which is a shame, because that is one of the key elements for successful conjuration that makes it tend to happen much faster. Likewise, it's not in the grimoires, but I've added the Shekinah in because I felt I got sort of prodded and looked, and there are a lot of references which could hint at her. I'm not saying that there's like any Shekinah tradition in the grimoires, but there's a lot of her titles and things. And by putting the Shekinah in, and instead of just doing the prayer to God before conjuration, doing prayer to the Shekinah as well, that dynamic between the divine feminine and the divine masculine completely alters the flavor of the conjuration, the fluidity of it, the beauty and the elegance of it comes from having the Shekinah there. And also, critically, as I realized when I was doing it, that if I read a book on the Shekinah. I'm very passionate about the Shekinah. The idea that we all are united in the Shekinah. It's like that everyone, the soul that is in you is a fragment of the Shekinah. And so if you call on the Shekinah and you're sort of activating that in yourself, you actually have the divine authority to work with the spirits, because you are connecting yourself to the cosmic divine feminine in yourself. You're doing an as above, so below with the cosmic Shekinah down into you as a fragment of the earthly Shekinah. So that's not in the grimoires, but that's something I've added. And the spirits I work with are very happy about it. They've totally approved of the Shekinah being there. So I'm not saying it can't be a static tradition, and there are elements in the old grimoires which are not appropriate for now. A classic example is a lot of them have this thing of having like a young, like 7-year-old virgin boy to be your seer. That has so many problems attached to it, I don't even need to mention them. That is just not, that bit's gone. Okay, that's totally in the past. That's never to be revisited. That's might have been relevant to them there, but not to us in this day and age. It's just wrong in so many ways. So, it's taking the bits that are true to it, that are the core of the tradition, and being faithful to that. So once you've got the experience, then I say play with it. And the template that I created, it's based on 44 years of conjuration, of having all those core bits and putting the stuff that I have found works the best, but stripping away the stuff that doesn't need to be there as well. And I've had lots of people get back to me, and I have people saying, I'd never done conjuration before, and I did the conjuration of the intelligence from Intelligentiarum, and it worked. And I'm like, great. And I've had other people say, I tried before and failed, and now it's worked. And other people say, well, I do my own thing, but I took this bit of your stuff and this bit and added it in, and I really like what it does. I'm like, great, because I'm not saying my way is the only way, my way is the best way. What I'm saying is this is what I've developed based on all my decades of experience and is successful for me. Take it for yourself, take what you want of it, use it, discard it, but hopefully you will find some of it of value. That's what the Klavers books are there for. If someone's never done it, then I recommend doing the whole thing wholesale. If people have got experience, they're still going to find things like the winds in Clave Spiritum. When that happened, I was told in a dream, look at the winds. Just after I'd written Claves Intelligentiarum, one of my spirits said, look, you need to look into the winds. And I woke up the next morning and I went and grabbed Swarmbook Honorius off the shelf because I thought that's most likely where I'll find it, and there was stuff in there. Then I messaged Stephen Skinner, because this is a couple of years back, and it's before Suma Seiko Magic had come out. I said, Stephen, can you send me what you've got on the winds from Suma? He said, yeah, and he sent me it. And there I found the Conjuration. And I thought, I really like this. I'm going to try. So I did a Conjuration for one of my spirits that I've worked with a lot over the years. I'm not packed into it, but I've worked with him a lot, so I was able to just get away with 3 days prep. And I asked him, and yeah, and he gave me a slight change to it. I thought that was great. He turned up, did the Conjuration of the winds, did his thing. He was there. Fabulous. So, okay, I need to get other people to test this. So I contacted a dozen or so people who I know, experienced magicians, and said, are you doing any Conjurations in the next few months? Can you throw this wind Conjuration in before the main Conjuration and see what happens? And they all said yes. And then, so I got reports back from people. Every single person was like, I did the wind Conjuration. The spirit came, in a couple of instances, the spirit came before I even did the main Conjuration. It was there at the end of the wind Conjuration. In other ones, that spirit was there by the end of the first Conjuration. And this was Conjurations of angels, of demons, of intelligences, of Olympic spirits from different grimoires. I thought, this is great. So far, 100% success. Now, I also get people messaging me saying, I'm going to do my first Conjuration. Do you have any advice? And things like that. So everyone who messaged me like that, I said, yes. And I gave them the wind Conjuration as well, because I didn't want just all my results to be from a data set of everyone who had like 20 years plus experience,
Mm-hmm.
And I gave it to all these people, and they all got back to me saying, it worked. The spirit turned up. So far, I've had about 40 people who I've passed it on to, or who have done it as a result of reading the books. In contact, every single one had the spirit turn up by the end of the first Conjuration. Because you look in the later, particularly the Black Magic grimoires, and say, you may need to do the recitation multiple times. Well, that's because there's no wind Conjuration to bring it. It's got to make its own way to you. So bringing the winds in, I think, made a huge difference and is a key component. I've gone off a bit on tangent from your question there, haven't I? Sorry. But I'm really passionate about this thing with the winds, because I do think it's a really important thing. And also the Shekinah, bringing that in, like I say, it's not there, but the winds is like a reclaiming of something that was there and dropped out. The Shekinah is something that's hinted at but isn't really there, but it fits. And if I'm going to add stuff in, I have my criteria. It's like, does it work critically? Yes. Does it fit? Yes. Is it relevant? Yes. And if it fits all those criteria, then I think something can be, added in. And Shekinah fits in so well. And like I say, the dynamic of having that divine feminine and you having the divine authority, because you have a fragment of the Shekinah in you, really makes a difference to Conjuration. It's not,
which the Shekinah is the flame, right? It's the feminine flame.
Yeah, it's that spark, that flame of the soul in you.
Mm-hmm.
It's the higher part of the soul is the Shekinah.
Absolutely.
I love that you said that, David. I feel like a lot of contemporary, like speculative Kabbalists, like including myself, have moved in this more non-dual direction where you must include the feminine divine principle. Obviously, that's easier for me because we always say the paradox of the deity is resolved in Yab Yum. So for, if you're a Tantra bro or a Vajrayanist, it's easy. That's easy to conceptualize. And you can recognize that through Dakini practices. You are liberating the prana paramita, the, perfection of wisdom that self arises through your solar plexus. That's exactly how you visualize it. And then the Dakini kind of rises up as a resplendent, heatless flame and, takes shape in the splendors of the world. So for me, what you're saying, I agree with a lot. And I think even like David Smith would say, like I've heard him say the womb is like the expansion in space, like we're infinite in space, but contained within the womb, and that is Zimzum. So I find that very like profound, and I think it's a really important sort of conceptualization. Like it doesn't have to be like a lot of people, especially online, I think get fixated on deities who are kind of mimetic, like Odin and Wotan, and there's a whole like movement towards it. I'm not like disparaging it at all, but I sometimes feel like it is again an imbalance. Like it's imbalanced to me. There's something, it's not quite Tiferatic. It's like there's a paradox, and I dislike that. So yeah, I think it's profound and interesting what you're saying, and it correlates to a lot of other like contemporary people in magic. Thank you.
Thank you. Another thing with the Shekinah as well, and working with Shekinah, apart from being wisdom, is the power of prophecy. So working with Shekinah, also another thing for helping develop your psychism and making it easier to engage with spirits. And of course, she's the mother of angels. So all the angels come from Shekinah. So you can't go wrong with, bringing her into the practices, which is why it is such a big part of Clave Spiritum, the Shekinah material.
I have a quick follow-up. This is a really quick one. Sorry, Nick. What color do you associate with the air or wind, David? Because I know in Tantra, this is a question. Sometimes it is green and sometimes it is gray or black. So it's dependent on text or Tantra.
I generally tend to be, I suppose, quite classical in that I tend to go with yellow and light blue as my airy colors.
Well, that kind of would make sense for green, at least, like for why the Central Asian sorcerers were sort of maybe seeing that color, because it's like obviously the synthesis between the two, which air is as a composite element.
Yes, that's true. You brought me on to another of my pet things, if I can just have a quick rant, which is that fire in the Western magical traditions has in modern times been sort of moved over to south instead of being in the east. Levi switched air and fire. If you go back to antiquity and all the way through the grimoires, you'll see that the elemental directions are fire in the east, where the sun rises, air in the south. But Eliphas Levi switched them, and then everyone since then has pretty much kept with those. But if you look at the elemental interactions, it should be fire. Even if you switch the whole directional thing, it should go fire, air, water, earth, because they're on the cross of hot, cold, dry, moist of the elemental qualities, and they each share a quality, one of their qualities, with the element on the other side of them, so that each element can change to the elements on either side of it, but not to the opposite element. So fire and water can't change into each other, earth and air can't change into each other. But there's a whole thing on elemental theory, which I won't go off on now, but that fire in the south thing really bugs me. I mean, I did it for many years as well myself, until I realized, I think through noticing more and more in the grimoires how fire was in the east, and then going back and seeing it in ancient Greece, and you see it all the way through, like I say, until Levi. And I think Levi switched it because of the seasonal attributions, probably. I was doing a class on this a week before last, and I think he did it because of the attributions to the seasons, and that's why he flipped fire and air with the qualities. But yeah, sorry.
Don't be sorry.
Because
it was great.
I think it's important for people to appreciate that it's not the direction, because obviously air is all around us. It's not just in the south, and the earth is underneath us and all the rest of it. But it's the relationship between their positions. Likewise, if I'm working outdoors and I'm standing next to the sea or a lake and it's in the south, that's where my water is. I'm not going to go, I'm going to pull on water in the west when all the water is right next to me in the south. You have to be flexible with these things. It's not, you've got to be practical. Symbolic is good, but practical is also really important.
Mhm.
That's actually how we
Yeah.
conceptualize it. Sorry, Kaiva.
No, I was just going to say, I agree with that. Even from like your astrological natal chart, when you're working with like certain stars, I find like I prefer to use them how they're in my natal chart because I feel like that's how it's written in my own personal reality. So I'll work in the direction that that star was when I was born.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
I just wanted to say really quick, like I agree with you, David. It's definitely a point where it drives me crazy too. But it's the way Tantra describes it is that the elements can move, like the wheel of the earth, the Malkuth can shift, like what you're saying, to like the geo-ontological positionality that the magician occupies. Like you see these formulations, especially like in medieval China, where they will do these very complicated sort of elemental mandalas on lakes. So like where are they invoking the water? Well, they're invoking the water from the south because that's what the primordial ground that they're actually standing on, because they're on like a wooden sort of like floating structure. So I think that that's a really interesting sort of way to orient yourself to something more primordial, or to like I don't know, some other principle, maybe wisdom, you could say.
Yep. Always go back to wisdom, truth and wisdom.
I like how you. I mean, I don't know if you mentioned this earlier. It could have been just I forgot already because there's so much stuff said. But with you adding the air in, I'm assuming. I mean, I like that that addition because I would assume that's like kind of goes along with transportation to get your message across anyway, right? Like I would see air as being part of like with communication or even transportation, like putting that air in the beginning, or the wind.
Yeah, but fire is actually the subtlest element. So from that point of view, again, the sequence as they get heavier goes fire, air, water, earth. You see that with symbols. So your fire, the upper triangle, then you've got your air, the triangle with the bar, which is also on the hexagram, it's the upper triangle and then the bar of the inverted triangle. The bar indicating it's heavier, and then you have water, your downward triangle, and earth, the downward triangle of the bar, indicating it's heavier again still. So it's an increase in heaviness. So again, from that point of view, it makes sense to go fire, air, water, earth. It's on the base qualities, on the most basic level first, rather than the things that then get attributed onto them. I understand what you mean about communication, the word, in the beginning was the word, etc. But even before the word, you have the darkness. So then you've got that they're all in the darkness. So splitting up, it becomes a whole other thing.
That just made me think about your communication, transportation, all those like the mercurial things that go along with that. Does anybody else have any other questions?
I had one question. Do you always do the same kind of prep, or especially like if you're working with the Olympians, because for me, I'm pretty lax on my prep unless I'm doing like solar work. If I'm working with Apollo or something, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to clean my entire house first and, make sure things are really clean. But I guess sometimes I'm like, well, maybe that's not necessarily necessary for like interacting with, Mercury or something like that. And I don't know whether I'm just lazy. I'm probably just lazy, but I was just wondering how you felt about that. Like if it's always necessary, because some are more orderly than others.
I mean, spirits generally like cleanliness. I mean, that's something that's repeated throughout the grimoires. It's personal cleanliness of the space, etc. So yeah, I do tend to be quite fastidious about it, I've got to admit. I mean, you even get advice in some of them with like things like keeping your nails trimmed and things like this. They really do go into personal hygiene, which is interesting, of course, because they're written at a time when personal hygiene was the early ones when you go 13th, 14th, 15th century, bathing was not really something that tended to happen that much for most people. But it stresses this whole thing about the bathing, the being clean, cutting the nails. All these things are really emphasized, and it's also mentioned in reports where, you know, spirits, even demons, have been annoyed that people were not clean enough when they did conjurations. In William Lilly's autobiography, you know, the astrologer, he talks about all these different characters, these different magicians he knew in London in the time in the 17th century. And he mentions one guy who was apparently a bit of a drunk who used to call up demons for audiences for money, and that the demons would berate him for being drunk and dirty. But he must have been an effective conjurer if they still turned up even though he was drunk and dirty, is all I can say to that one. But yeah, personally, I am a bit fastidious about the cleaning thing.
So you don't feel like it's just miasma, it's deeper than that. It's, you know.
I think miasma, I would say, probably more is an issue with the gods, whereas when you're working with the spirits, it's your personal cleanliness and the cleanliness of the room that you are going to do the stuff in with them if it's indoors. Those are what have to be maintained. The state of the rest of the place might not be up to the same standard, the rest of the house or the flat or what have you, but the room that it's going to be in and your personal hygiene are paramount. I mean, working with gods, that takes me onto a whole other rant, because, you know, if you have devotional shrines, I get really frustrated by people who leave offerings for too long on shrines, and I think it's incredibly disrespectful to leave food to rot or flowers to die or stuff on shrines rather than leave them for a short fixed period of time and then, you know, dispose of them respectfully afterwards. It really winds me up.
I've got a quick thing if Nick doesn't mind. Okay. So I love that you said that, David, about shrines and altars. Like, I change mine out every day, but that's also like, I'm a, you know, Tantric Buddhist. So that's basically how our ritual system works, is that you do fresh lamp, fresh water, and fresh flowers or floral water every day. So I hear you on that. I want to ask you, how do you, if you do, and maybe you don't, and if you don't, that's okay, but how do you reconcile the fifth element, sort of like the more Central Asian or East Asian idea of Akasha or space?
I suppose I go more with the Western take of like it being sort of created by the harmony of the four elements. So it's like the quintessence. It's more the way I view sort of the fifth element of spirit. To me, it's like although we call them spirits, they're not creatures of pure spirit. They're they are still, in a sense, elemental beings of air, of fire, water, earth, even light. But spirit to me is where we're talking about what we put those names of Shekinah and God and other things for that, the unintelligible mystery. For me, that is spirit. The unknowable divine.
I think actually a lot of Tantric Buddhists would agree with you. It is sort of the deity when he arises in, or her, in space. So in like a kind of quote unquote emptiness, which is obviously for us masslessness and luminousness. It's not nothingness. So I hear what you're saying. I agree. It is kind of like the four elements brought into pristine awareness, and your somebody fire ignites, and then the form arises before you. I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, David.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody got anything else? Want to ask anything? No. All right. David, I think we'll wrap it up here. We're about a little bit over an hour and a half. Thank you very much. That was an amazing discussion. Better than the first time. I really, truly appreciate it. Love to get you going again in the future for talk about this stuff or your upcoming work as well. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to come again.
Yeah, I'd like to hear about the Goetia once you're done with that. That's really interesting to hear your take on that. I actually kind of wanted to get into that, but I just didn't want to like touch it. Figure we'll find out when it's out.
Yeah, that one, I hope to have that written by the end of the year.
Oh, great.
So, yeah, I mean, the current one should be out, the one that I've just finished hopefully should be out by October, November, on the Pentacles and stuff. So that one, now I've got to get this one done. I mean, I'm fired up with it. I've done, just to put in perspective, I mean, amongst looking after my daughter and all the other things I have to do every day, I've managed to knock out 6,500 words yesterday and today on my sort of take on the Gorisha. So it's already hit over 31k words. It's going to be a reasonably sized book, and I'm getting that obsessive fire that I get when I'm really passionate, with a book, and I know I'm going to be getting woken up in the night again and stuff with things pointed out to me. I've already had that with this. I actually had an angel wake me up to point out something I needed to change, and it's like, okay. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be possibly one of the most important books I've written. I mean, that sounds a bit
that's awesome.
Arrogant to say, but
To you, it is.
this one feels like it's something that really, again, needs to be done.
I like it. I'm looking forward to hearing about it. Before we wrap it up, I'll let everybody real quick. Kaiva, let everybody know where they can find all your work, please.
Yes, this was a lovely conversation. Thanks for being here, David. You can find me at 11kaivarose33.com. I practice traditional astrology and tarot, and you can find me as well as Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And Jen, the ninja.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the panel. And of course, David, for tolerating my kind of like more autism points on the tree and on magic in general. I really appreciate it. It is amazing to be in dialogue with you again. If people want to check me out, just follow us on YouTube, youtube.com/Threshold Saints. You'll find both Threshold Saints and the Grey Lodge. And I'm happy to announce we are doing Meta Magical series on Battlestar Galactica Reimagined. So that will air next Friday live. So we were going to see how that goes, a speculative Gnostic reading of Battlestar. So yeah, check that out. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Interesting. No, thank you, sir. And we got Magus. What is up, Magus?
Oh, everything is up. It's fantastic. This is a fantastic conversation, David. I truly appreciate it. I would love to have you come on my show as well, to also have a lovely conversation if you're up for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, David. Nice. That's amazing. Yeah, this was fantastic. This is everything that we need in our world, understanding of magic, deep understandings of ritual, to try to bring ritual back into the temple space, both internal and external. So thank you, Nick, for bringing us all together on such a brilliant topic. Everyone can find Magus in the Media on YouTube, X, Instagram, putting it up on Apple and Spotify here soon. And so, yeah, we're just, we're all just one man, one woman trying to go up against the great archons that are in this world, the ones that are trying to help build us into this truly humans that we actually are, if we can rise ourselves from that animal state into the higher divine. It's brilliant. So subscribe, like, and share to everyone on this panel, because as we're going about it, there are many of the lower realms trying to hold us back. So this is fantastic. Again, thank you, Nick, for everything, and thank you, David.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you coming on. And Jules, my man, what is going on?
Oh, man, this was a banger of an episode. I learned a lot. Thank you, David. Like I said, I haven't learned this much for some time. It's been a while since I've been on the Occult Rejects. Guys, you can find me over on Patreon, doing stuff over there. Gods of the Morning Wood, Occult Cinema. Having one of those, I think we're going to watch Begonia. So be letting y'all know this week. Yeah, Nick, I'll definitely shoot you the link. Go check out Gods of the Morning Wood. May do a stream later. I'm going out on the boat, so who knows? But yeah, no, this was fantastic and actually answered a lot of things that I experienced in my own spiritual practices. So yeah, again, thank you, David, and thank you, everybody, for the lovely conversation.
Thank you, sir. And Eros, what is up, Eros?
Yes, I want to echo everybody else and say thank you. This is great. It's just really nice. I feel like it's a huge privilege to be able to talk to you, and for us to do this, because you're so knowledgeable, and it's awesome. really glad to be a part of it. So thanks, Nick. And hopefully we can get you on again to talk about the Ars Goetia. That's exciting. Gives us a lot of time to think of some fun questions. But as mentioned at the start, I have my YouTube channel, Aerosup, and then you can also find me on X at Aeros2Ethos. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, Eros. I appreciate it. And David, please remind everybody what you want them to know about where they can find all your stuff, your website, your books. Please let them all know.
Well, I'm not really a social media person very much, so I mainly just tend to occasionally post about what I'm doing on Facebook or when I remember on my website, drankine. Well, is it davidrankine.com? God, I can't even remember my own website address. How bad is that?
That's good.
Yes, davidrankine.com. There you go. Shows how long it's since I upgraded that. Yeah, and I just enjoy the chance to chat with people like this. It's been great. I've had a blast. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. No, again, it was a great time the first time, and it was awesome this one, and hopefully get you on again in the future. Thank you, everybody who joined. I appreciate it. I appreciate all the questions, all the insight. Everybody in the chat, that's what's up. Thank you. I appreciate you all for making it. And that's the end of another Occult Rejects. Until the next one, everybody be well. Later.